Good evening, and welcome to the library. I'm Sarah Holliday, the Library Events Coordinator, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's wonderful event. First, a word not from, but about our sponsors. You'll see on the back of your program that spring is our special appeal time. This year, we're asking for your support specifically for events like this one, as well as our popular seminars, technology workshops, and performances. The fees we charge at the door cover only a fraction of their cost, and we need your help to keep them going. We're extremely grateful to those who've given already, and we hope everyone will join their number. Donation envelopes are on the table by the door if you'd like to take one on the way out. So my main task tonight is to introduce our speakers, but honestly, I'm really just here to brag about what a terrific job I have. Not only do I spend the day surrounded by 300,000 books in this landmark building, but every time I get in the elevator, I'm next to another gifted writer in the midst of their creative process. At the top of that list is the library's good friend, Meg Wolitzer. She served on our New York City Book Awards jury since 2005. The year before that, she participated in our 250th anniversary presentations. In 2011, she offered fantastic insights on writing fictional characters alongside Elizabeth Stroud. And the following year, she spoke to children's library patrons and taught them Scrabble with her last title, The Fingertips of Duncan Dorfman. Somehow, during all of that, she's managed to author 12 novels, several of them bestsellers, including The Position, The 10-Year Nap, and The Wife. The Interestings, hot off the press this April, has been called Remarkable by the New York Times, Wonderful by Vanity Fair, and Genius by the Chicago Tribune, only a tiny sample from an outpouring of critical and popular acclaim. When I contacted Meg about speaking, she made me a wonderful offer. Rather than a lecture, would it be all right to converse with her friend Delia Ephron? Needless to say, I would never turn down bringing in a second best-selling author, especially the one who co-wrote a film central to the lives of book lovers everywhere, You've Got Mail. Miss Ephron's most recent title is The Lion is In. You've probably also heard of her novel and film Hanging Up and the hit play Love, Lost, and What I Wore. I hear we can look forward to her new nonfiction book, Sister, Mother, Husband, Dog, etc., in September of this year. I'm deeply honored to present to you Meg Wolitzer and Delia Ephron.
Well, hello, and I'm honored to be here with Meg, who is my good friend and just an amazing novelist. She's one of my idols. I devour her books. I get jealous of them.
No.
I do. There are some things in these books that I am extremely jealous of. And jealousy is a theme in her book, which we're going to talk about today. And this particular book, The Interestings, is really an epic novel. It takes place over a 40-year period. It begins in 1974, about when 6 people become a group at a camp and name themselves the Interestings, and it follows their lives. And one of the things that is really remarkable about what Meg does in this book is that she manages to create the panorama of culture and politics over all that time, and then at the same time create the absolute intimacy of the characters' lives. What friendship is like, what marriage is like, what the conversations at the dinner table and the bedroom are like. It's so, I don't know anyone that can do the big and the intimate the way Meg can. And, but before we begin, as we begin, Meg, tell us just where you live. Are you an only child?
I live on the Upper East Side. I live in this neighborhood. This is my neighborhood library, and a very, very important place to me. And if some of you are not members, rush and join, because it's, you know, don't you feel like you're in Edith Wharton's home right now? She was a member here.
Do you have children? Are you married?
I
know
have
the answers, but
my oldest sister Nancy is in row 3, right here. Raise your hand, Nancy. So we are 2 sisters. So I grew up on Long Island, and I have 2 sons who are graduating from high school and college respectively this spring. So I've had a very busy year because it involved college applications. Not that I had anything to do with them.
Yes, you know that.
Yeah.
And do you have any phobias that we should know about?
I have never been asked this question. Why, were you going to spring
No,
things
just
on?
more New Yorkers tell me they wouldn't be cut dead on the subway, and I live on the subway, or that they're washing their hands with Purell every 5 minutes. So now I've gotten very curious
No, the
about
only
whether
thing I would say, I went to a book group recently and everybody was commenting on the view and they all crammed out onto the terrace and there was this incredible panoramic view over Harlem and the city. And I just sort of went, looks good, and like kind of went and got some olives. I just realized, I'm sort of, yeah, the closer I stood to the edge, the less happy I was about the evening.
Okay, all right, well, let's keep that
That's about
in
it.
mind.
That's about it.
That's pretty good, because authors can be very weird. And
I'm very neurotic. Did you ask me if I'm
yes.
neurotic?
Oh, yes.
I still bite my nails.
Oh, okay.
I never stopped. My mother once bought me, this is so pathetic. She thought that the big lure would be a manicure kit. I mean, like what? Like in a red leather case?
Very sad.
Well, I'll stop for that. So I have these neuroses, but they don't get in the way. I think my friends see them as sort of affectionate, kooky things, or at least behind my back they don't. But
Yeah, right, of course.
how about you?
I'm working very hard to get rid of them all. I figure that they're just kind of a waste. I mean,
Yeah.
like
what?
I don't know if I have any. Wait a minute.
Your hair. You posted that.
Oh, yes. I'm obsessed with my hair, and I post every 5 seconds, and I write on Twitter something called the Hair Report, which, believe it or not, is extremely popular because I believe that no one cares about the weather, they only care what the weather is going to do to your hair, which we all know is true. So it is amazing to me that I have come up with as many hair reports as I have.
That is great.
Yeah, that is an obsession. But let us begin where the novel begins, which is 6 friends at camp. And would you talk about camp and your camp experiences?
Yes, and in fact, I have a show and tell because 2 people from my camp are here. This is like, the end of The Wizard of Oz, right? And I don't know if they would say the same thing about the camp that I would say, but I know that the camp was very, very important to them as well. Here was the story. I grew up in the suburbs, Long Island, Syosset, which I like to refer to by its original Native American name, Exit 43. And I grew up in a pretty bookish house because my mother, Meg Wolitzer, is a writer. But, it was still the suburbs, and I didn't know any sort of sophisticated kids I just didn't know kids who went to Dalton. I never heard of it. I didn't know anything about the world of the city, more specifically, or about art or anything. And I went to this camp in 1974, the summer Nixon resigned. And I went to this camp, and it was like a magic light switch had been flipped. Suddenly, I became a little pretentious. But more than that, there was a seriousness about art. There was a seriousness about music, art, theater that I'd never had before. Every morning we sang Mozart requiems, the whole camp. And I remember right at the beginning being very upset about this, calling home from the payphone in the grotto, "Mother, they make me sing Mozart requiems," just this spoiled, and she was like, "Well, stick it out a little longer," and then fairly soon, I'm like, D, C, Dominus, I'm like, I drank the aesthetic Kool-Aid, but it was fabulous. The people who ran it believed in the arts. They'd been running this camp, I don't really know from what year, but 1952, says our archivist. All kinds of people had been to the camp. Arlo Guthrie, Carly Simon taught guitar there. Julie Taymor, Frank Rich. They all went to this camp, which was called Indian Hill, in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. It was heaven. It closed after the 2nd year. I went the 2nd year. It closed. It was really, that was the end. I can't believe that I got there so late because I would have loved it so much if I'd been there earlier. And I made lifelong friends. And And I would say it changed me. Now I know that you can say, how many people in this room went to camp? Oh, a lot of people. But I would say that, the book isn't a summer camp novel, it's also about the disappointments of growing older. So how many people are growing older?
But the friendship is forged at a summer camp, and I think that's significant because camp is a place where you aren't the person you are in high school.
No,
you can leave high school, go to camp, and reinvent yourself.
But you did not have a good experience.
Well, no, but I'm a West Coast girl, and the East Coast and camp, it's a whole nother thing. It's a ritual in the East to go to camp, which is not in the West. I just went to a sports camp.
Oh yeah, no, that would have been...
No, but this thing you're talking about, you can be someone else. You can find a kind of friendship that is completely different.
I completely changed. I mean, I tried out, in my novel actually, the character is called Julie on the first page, and within a few pages, somebody calls her Jules, and from then on, for the rest of her life, she's called Jules, just sort of accidentally, and it suits her so much more. She prefers the name. It has a kind of artfulness to it. And I remember walking around carrying novels, like with the titles facing out, like The Magic Mountain. I carried The Magic Mountain. I got so much mileage out of that book. I have not gotten past Hans Castorp looked up. I don't know the opening of that book. That is not the opening line of that book. But I really did change that summer. But the problem, Delia, is that when you go back home, you don't feel like you fit.
Well, one of the interesting things about the novel is this is the first time Jules is introduced to Manhattan.
Yeah.
Because she meets the sophisticated kids from Manhattan, which I think probably many people here are raising. But there's such a difference if you're in the suburbs, because the only time you come in is to go to the theater, or your mother takes you to Saks, or when I was a kid, you went to Schraff's or something. But there was a kind of thing that you talk about, because Jules is like you from the suburbs, and there she is with the sophisticated and rich is important here, world of Manhattan.
Yeah,
she falls in love.
A lot of the book is really about class, I think, because she's sort of introduced into the world of this very wealthy family that lives on Central Park West, and she is brought in to the family, and she has to then go back to her town, and her father has died, and she's in a kind of sad house with her mother and her sister, and she can't bear doing that. The city, when I used to go into the city, when we went into the city with our parents, in the Rambler station wagon, we would go to the Museum of Modern Art, and I would be like, yes, Mom, I see that it's a Campbell's soup can. You can also have change when your parents are around. Life needs to be more like a Peanuts cartoon.
Yeah.
You can only really love art and change and become who you are when you're with your cohort, away from adults.
Do you think that class is still a big thing now in our culture?
It's huge. I think it's huge. Absolutely. Because the city has become so much harder to live in. You're always working, you're always striving, and you're aware of stuff all the time. Even on the level, like when your kids are young and you have to sort of leave work to do something, can you do that? Can you get away? Childcare, we have no good, cheap childcare in this country. It's made life really, really hard for a lot of women. I think that the city is the most wonderful place to live, and it's so dynamic to raise kids here. And I don't know that my kids appreciate how great that is, because we went to McDonald's. I hitchhiked. I did these stupid things. Mm-hmm. There was sort of nothing much to do. Right. And the kids really, they can't say there's not that much to do, although they still do say that.
Well, one of the things I love in this book is that Jules is always an outsider, even though she's in the group, because she can never be that rich, and she doesn't attain the fame that other members of the group do. And there's a moment when she gets one of those, the two that marry, Ethan and Ash, who are so wealthy and successful, and they send out one of those horrible Christmas letters you get from people, where there's this one that I used to always get from this doctor I barely knew. Oh, my twin daughters both scored perfect 800s on their college boards, and one is going to Harvard and one is going to Yale. I would just, you probably do. You read them and you just want to just scream. Yeah. And she gets this, Jules, and she says that she's going to go out in the snow and die of hypothermia and which I thought was so Meg, but I think you should talk about envy and jealousy in the world of your book and in the world that we're living in.
You know, when I started writing the interstings, I thought that it was more about envy, and in fact, recently I dug up the contract, which feels so long ago already. You'll say anything to get a book contract? Yeah, I do a book about, And I looked at it and it said, this will be a novel about female envy. And I was shocked that was, because really what it became about finally for me was about what happens to talent over time, and I'll get to that a little bit. But the envy, I wanted to write about the envy that you feel for people, not the kind of envy that you see in films or television, which is so blatant and you express it, but the kind of quiet, depressed envy that you feel for people you really love. I've heard tell of this kind of envy. No, but you know that feeling? I mean, is anybody here bad like me? It's like, okay, like I have a lot of friends who are very successful. And friends I love, and when they tell me something good has happened to them, I'm really happy. I'm really, really, really happy. But then, after a while, this horrible thing can happen. It doesn't happen all the time, or even most of the time, where you start thinking of yourself. And that's the awful thing that I feel about human nature. We turn everything around to ourselves in some, I mean, maybe you don't, and I'm not saying I do this all the time at all. But it's an awful thing. It's like the ego gets stuck into the room like a moose head mounted on the wall.
It's true. It's so great. Yes, I think that's true.
And Jules experiences this because, well, just at the beginning of the book, this boy Ethan, who is kind of my favorite character in the book. He's an animator, and he's very homely, and he loves her. And she tries to love him back, and they kiss, and she just doesn't feel anything for him. And he ends up marrying the beautiful girl at the camp, Ash, and he creates a television show, nighttime cartoon show that's sort of Simpsons-ish, called Figland. His name's Ethan Figman. And Ethan and Ash have this magical life, but they're really good. Like the Christmas letter shows that they start charities, but they're funny and nice.
It's hard to be envious of people who start charities.
It is. And maybe help you too.
Yeah, right.
They're generous. So how do you do that? You must be a terrible person if you feel envious of them. Mm-hmm. But she does, and she sort of hates that in herself, and yet she has to kind of release it. So it created a kind of comic relief, but I think it spoke to something real that we don't like to talk about.
I think that's true. I think the brilliance of Facebook with all that thumbs up stuff is that you can be happy for someone in a click.
Yeah.
But you don't ever actually call them up and say, I'm so happy for you.
Like when I first went on Facebook, I didn't understand. I was like talking to people in another country. I said, like, what means this like? What does it mean? Like, what does it do? And nobody could really explain it. Then, like,
yeah,
really?
It's like a virtual cheering squad.
It's like, yes, but I didn't understand. Like, it seemed unbelievable that people would just go and do it. And I didn't. I realized more and more that you do it when you just sort of don't want to be bothered with anything of substance. And that's a terrible thing, right? Yeah. If somebody writes something, I should have called them, okay, like,
Exactly.
So if you ever
My book's coming out.
I'm not buying it. Thumbs up.
It's terrible. It's very brilliant, is what it is.
It really was a brilliant move, I know.
But the whole idea that they call themselves, I mean, these kids are hanging out in a tent or something, and they decide to give themselves a name, the Interestings, which I think so captures the sort of, how adolescents just think they're so important all the time. And in my family, if you were not interesting, if you were boring, that was like being called an axe murderer. So I related to this idea that they thought that they had a destiny and that they were so remarkable, even though it's clear that they were in some ways ordinary. And I think that's such I love that. If you just want to talk a little bit about that idea, where did that come from?
Well, I want to say that although I did go to a camp that was similar, really the book is an invention. I mean, whatever, the characters are an invention, and whatever happens is an invention too. And I don't think that my friends and I were even very much like these kids. I feel that novels are not just like they don't just take place on an average day. They're sort of like a bouillon cube of a day, or a bouillon cube of a scene, or a way things are. So my sense of this was to sort of create almost like a hyper-real version of what I remember, to make them, to sort of elevate it to something that you don't have to relate to exactly, but you know what I'm getting at about adolescent self-awareness. So when they call themselves the Interestings, they say it with irony. And there's a line early on in the book, which is that irony was new to her.
I have it written down here.
Oh, you do?
It's one of my favorite lines.
Oh,
now I have to find it.
I think I know. Was new to her and tasted oddly good, like a newly available summer fruit.
Oh yeah, because I wrote it in my envy
Yeah,
jealousy section. I was
Okay.
totally envious of this line.
There it is.
Yeah, irony was new to her and tasted oddly good, like a previously unavailable summer fruit.
Oh, that's much better. When you try to say something, here's the thing: when you give I don't know if you're like this, but when you give, writers do this a lot.
Oh, no.
When you give a reading and you change things, because you like suddenly, it's always a terrible mistake. There was a reason you didn't write it that way, and it's too late because you're. Do you ever do that? Have you ever suddenly changed something in front of an audience?
Oh yes, once in a while.
It's always a mistake. You realize.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
part
part of what's embarrassing about having a husband is that they learn that you tell your stories exactly the same way, because if storytelling is something you do, you know exactly how you want to tell it. And so there they sit at the table, and it's not just that they hear the story again, but they hear it word for word because you.
No, they know what it comes like.
Yeah,
slick.
I know.
I know. I always say to my husband, "Go away now." Like if I'm at a cocktail party and I'm about to launch into the thing. I think everybody has like 4 stories. You know, just hone them and refine them. That is my advice to everybody. What was the question?
Do you? I just want to ask you: do you know the first line of this book by heart?
Oh wow, these are the questions. Your phobias. Your what is next? Your social security.
No.
Number. Let me see.
I think the first line of a book is really a significant thing, and I love the first line of your book. But
Yeah.
do you know it by heart?
In July of that long evaporated year, the Interestings gathered for the very first time. In early July of that long evaporated year, the Interestings gathered for the very first time.
Okay, it's on a warm night
Oh!
in early July. Long evaporated year. That long evaporated year is something that just gives me little chills.
Well, that's so funny you should say that, because I'll tell you that that was a very important moment in the writing of this book. The original line, and I'm sorry I forgot the warm night, but you're right, of course it isn't. It really originally read on a warm night of that year, in early July of that year. And it sort of sounded very almost technical. And I thought, I think things in fiction do double duty, are there to serve double purpose. Here's what Long Evaporated did. It told you that time is going to pass in this book. It already told you this is not a YA book about a funny summer camp. It also has a melancholy quality, doesn't it? Like, we want to hold on to things. We want to hold on to experiences. And when I came up with Long Evaporated, I did like the little internal Snoopy dance, because I knew that it had done the double duty that I wanted it to do.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. What did that first line do for you in writing? It's really interesting. I thought so.
It set the whole thing in motion for me, and I felt confident. It's sort of like when you have some money in your pocket. You know, it's sort of like I felt confident with that line, like I could proceed from there. I feel that way about titles, and I don't know, you have this fabulous title for your collection. I mean,
titles are important, and there's nothing more upsetting than finishing a book and not having a title, because then you know you failed.
yes.
If you haven't found your title in the course of writing your book, you've made something
Yes,
wrong.
you don't know,
Yeah.
you haven't worked something out that you wanted to say. You're not sure fully what you wanted to
You
say.
haven't figured the themes out. You haven't, some way the book is, and then there's that nightmare which has happened to me where the publisher has decided that your book isn't a good title for selling. They say, oh, the sales force doesn't like your title. And then you're in this nightmare where you're calling up all your friends. It's like, what do I name the baby? And everyone's saying, no, I don't like that name. And then you're just, that's the worst. I've had that happen twice.
You have to do an unimpeachable title, because it's the title of the book, and then everybody knows it. And I kind of felt that was true for this.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
So.
No, absolutely.
Unless I should have called it That Firefly Summer. Terrible, terrible title.
Is there a character that you identify with more than, you just said Ethan was your favorite, which is fascinating to me because I always think your characters are your children, so I'm always amazed when someone will just say that they have a favorite, but who are you identifying with? Because let's face it, they're all some part of you. Right?
Yeah, I guess
It's impossible in fiction. They
it's
have
so
to be.
weird about fiction, right? Like where you have the thing I like about fiction. I mean, I don't write much nonfiction at all. I feel like when I write nonfiction, it's like writing a book report. I get into this sort of stiff way. When I write fiction, I feel as if I'm hiding behind like Wonder Woman's shield, and I can say anything, and it doesn't even occur to me, do people think it's about me or not? I don't really care, because it is fiction. It really is fiction. So I guess I'm sort of like Jules, and I'm sort of like Ethan. Because Jules doesn't achieve her dreams, but her dreams are sort of a child's dreams for herself. They're not even, it's not like she has something she's burning to do forever. She's somebody who, in the scheme of talent, is a talented, good, smart person, but she doesn't end up with a really big life. Ethan, who has this kind of inborn talent that you can't give to somebody, he has it since he's a child. I feel like, in a way, I was a creative child, and I wasn't like a genius like Ethan at all. But I remember loving just sort of being alone with my own thoughts and doing creative things so deeply in a way that I relate to him.
I think this thing that Jules has to accept, which is that she isn't really interesting, that her life is good, but it isn't what that means for those characters, which is in some way remarkable, not really interesting, but actually remarkable, is something, well, I used to think, when I come from a family that's obsessed with fame. My father was obsessed with fame, and I didn't quite realize it until I went to college, and I said to my roommate, I said, I want to be famous. This is, before Vanna White, who was the first person to be famous for turning letters, which is to say doing nothing. And Susan said to me, well, you have to do something to be famous. And I swear that was the first time it crossed my mind. This thing about fame now is such an obsession, so it's so hard for Jules to, I think, to accept this thing that the whole country is worshiping, don't you?
Oh, it's crazy. And in fact, when you're young, you think, like, there was a girl at our camp who was such a talented actress, and I just sort of said, oh, she's going to be famous. Like, that's the way a child thinks. As if the trajectory of someone's life is straight. Now, I'm obsessed with the films of Michael Apted, 7 Up, 28 Up, if you know these incredible films. He basically, for those of you who haven't seen them, he shot footage of children starting when they were 7 and followed them into middle age, shooting them every 7 years. And 56 Up is the most recent one. And they're incredible because you see the dashed dreams, the deaths of parents, the way somebody doesn't achieve their dreams, but you still see the child in that adult and the adult in the child. And it's not fair what happens. So much about whether you become famous or successful is about luck, which involves money, of course, it comes back to that, and connections, which these people have and she doesn't. The thing that I realized, I was talking to my editor at one point, and she said, if Jules hadn't met these characters, she would think her life was good enough. She would be really happy. But the fact that she knows them, it's like an itch in her. And that's a terrible thing that gives her. Because she has this kind of great husband, and they have a sort of smaller life than her friends who send out the Christmas letter have. So what's a good enough life? That's something I think that I started to think about in the book.
Right. Well, I think all of us in New York think that we live a more privileged life. That just being a New York lover and being in Manhattan, just being able to say I live in Manhattan. There's something really, really fantastic about that. And I think feeling that you can even master the city gives you a sense of confidence. But I have fallen out with friends whose lives took turns that, well, just honestly, where there was such a difference in money, and it just got painful. I think it got painful in terms of going out to dinner, all these things that matter so much. But I think when following these characters, did you know well, here's one thing I want to ask you. I mean, one of the things I think about novels is and any writing you do, is that it shows up your strengths and your weaknesses as a person in general. Like, if you avoid conflict, you will avoid conflict in your novels. It's sort of like being a parent, you know, where however screwed up you are, it's going to come out when you start parenting. And so I wanted to ask you what you think your strengths and weaknesses as a human being show up in your work.
It's very heavy tonight.
You don't have to answer.
No, I want to answer that. I want to think about that. These are questions I've never been asked before. I'm just sort of expecting the usual, where do you get your ideas, what's your process like? I'm like, all right, you know, phoning it in. No, I think I've changed as a writer. I mean, I started publishing young. I sold my first novel when I was 21. And, you know, it was I want to just say, parenthetically, it was a very, very different era in publishing. If you think back to, you know, it came out in 1982. So when I went to meet my editor, actually, and I had, you know, she said she was going to buy the book, I came down the train from college, and I had my little copy box with my manuscript with me, and I got on the old Random House building elevator, and a priest got on, and he was carrying this huge manuscript tied up with a rope. And he looked at me and he said, "Do they know you're coming?" I said, "Yes." He said, "They don't know I'm coming." And you know, my sense is really that it's a great sort of metaphor, like that readers are sort of ambivalent about all the glut of fiction, especially today because of the internet and the things that we have. You know, like when you go to a bookstore or to a library and you stand before this wall of titles, it's like overwhelming. Do you feel this way? And you don't know what to pick. My feeling now has sort of become like, look, I grew up with a very supportive mother who liked everything I wrote, and that was a fantastic thing. But when you get older, and you're writing, and the world has become so much more competitive, and there's so many more things vying for everybody's time. I mean, people read far fewer novels, I think, than they used to. And you know how you have to carve out time, like fighting off with swords, fighting for your time to read your George Eliot at night, or whatever it is you want to read. You know, you as the fiction writer need to kind of make the case for your novel. You need to tell the reader why you're telling them this, why they ought to give their valuable time to you. So that kind of brought out strengths in me, I hope, which is, what could I do? Well, I do like to, as you say, look at the small things, and once in a while try to look at the big things. And if you can do them at the same time, I think what that creates in a novel is sort of a feeling of the way you live now. I feel like novels are sometimes a snapshot of a moment in time. I can't do everything in a book. I never think about will the book last. I just don't care because I'm this big atheist. I feel like this is it, and do it now. If not now, when? I was on a panel at a book festival once with a writer, a very good writer, who was just sort of starting out and was getting real success. And she came up to the others of us on the panel afterwards and said, "You know, I don't know how you write about, you know, I've written like real sexual material or dark material." She said, "You know, I have to show up at the school in the morning, and I don't want those mothers thinking things about me." And I felt sorry for her, because you're going to not write what you want because of people you don't even necessarily like. I mean, and that really stuck with me, because you have to just sort of write what absorbs you. You have to write what interests you. You have to write what you're obsessed about. I feel like the best way to find that out would be if there was a running tape of everything you Googled and looked up all day on the internet, and you could see it, you would know who you were. But nobody, because you think nobody else is looking. Isn't it sort of upsetting to think about? Like for me, it would be like, you know, like weird diseases, you know, and I mean, like, yeah, it would be your neuroses and your grandiosities and your general interests in art, but it would be a mix of those things. Take those things, make them into a book. Another way to see it is this: how do your friends see you? Like, what role do you occupy among your friends? And when you write, I mean, I've said this sometimes to students because I teach fairly often. When you write, if a book isn't working and it feels a little stiff. First of all, are some of you writers or want to write or, okay. Is the way you are, the way your friends might describe you, is some of that in your work? And if it's not, maybe more of it should be in your work, because it's who you are. Zadie Smith had this great line. She said she writes to express her way of being in the world. And if you can do that, I think you're getting to something true and real. My weaknesses, for a long time, and this is like barely a...
You don't have to have any.
No, I do. I certainly do, and one of them is conflict. And Margaret Atwood read my palm, as she's read most of yours too, I'm sure. Yeah, she did, and she said that I had a big aversion to conflict, and she was right. And
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know she does.
So
that
you have to
sometimes.
work at that when you write to make.
Yes. Well, you know, this book had
drama,
more.
so
This book had more
interesting.
plot than any book I've written before. I mean, my friends would tease me that I would have, like, people would be emptying a dishwasher in a novel that I'd write, and suddenly they're thinking about 1968. I've forgotten about the dishwasher scene. I've forgotten about it. I never even go back to the scene, and there's no drama in the dishes, and there's no drama in 1968. But it was well written. Now, that's the problem. If you grow up and you take writing classes and people think you're a good writer or lyrical, you can really fall back on that, and it can kind of make you not grow as a writer, I think. That can really happen.
You know, I'm always so worried about holding attention that I'm concerned about the turning of the page.
But
to the detriment sometimes of the other. You know, in other words, doing this tap
But
dance.
because you've written screenplays and plays, you have to be aware of that in a way that I would like more of that.
Yeah, it helps you with plot. There's no question, and I love plot, and there's no question that writing screenplays teaches you an enormous amount about that.
Yeah.
And I like to do that. It's interesting. Do you know, first of all, there are two things I really want to know about. One of the things about your books is that they're the panorama of the world, that everything takes place, and you seem to know the music, you seem to know people are drinking vodka and tang, you seem to know how to roll a joint. There's so much stuff in the books, and I'm wondering how you know what's going on with Nixon and with, you know, the politics are all there, and the AIDS controversy. How do you research that? I mean, how does that work into the development of your book?
I would say that's my really weakest point as a fiction writer. I'm scared of getting things wrong. I know that I do get things wrong. But again, you can use that Wonder Woman shield of fiction. Well, in my version, the Chrysler building is on this street, you know.
I don't think anyone cares about that, but how do you research? I mean,
here's what I
Does
do.
it come in second? Do you
Yeah, it comes in
second.
second. All right, this is how I write a book. I write the first 80 pages without doing anything. I believe that 80 pages is around a great number of pages. It's not too much, so that if you write 100 pages or more and you end up putting it aside, you're going to feel like you wasted your time. If you've written 80 pages, you can feel proud of yourself, but if you can still get out now. But I want to really write it with this, again, grandiose fantasy. This is going to be really great. This is my big book. You know, you write that way, this really shameless way. Nobody has to see it. And then you've written those pages, and then you take them to a coffee shop. Well, I do. And I sit there with a pen, and I mark them up, and I say, oh, this is what I have, as opposed to what I wanted to have. Here's what I've got. This is what I've actually got. And then I start to make my peace with it, and I mourn what it isn't anymore. I mourn what I thought it was going to be, and it isn't. And I start to see what it really is. And it's about facing reality, and I suppose that's similar to what people go through, say, in therapy or things. You know, it's like you start to see, well, this is what I have, this is what I am. And you move from there. So then, around that point, I say, well, what is the whole thing? And I start to actually kind of outline it. And once I'm outlining it, I see, like for instance, there was a thing about child labor in this book, and I knew that that was going to come up. And it wasn't a huge point, but it was an important scene. And I asked around, and I found the person to talk to. And I said to her, would you let me ask you some very targeted questions? So it was sort of like the way like Woody Allen gives only a few pages of a script to the person, you know, what you need to know. I gave her pages that she needed to know. And I said, what here is wrong? And I asked her to elaborate on things, and it was so helpful. And I did this actually David France, who directed this fantastic documentary about the AIDS movement, but sort of ACT UP. I said to him, "Would you read these pages?" And he actually had some really smart changes about that era and about AIDS. I want to say that AIDS, I realized when I was writing this book, was going to figure in it, because I feel like younger people today don't have a sense of what the city felt like during the AIDS crisis. And I am so shocked that that seemed to have closed up. And the trauma of that period, I still feel like there's a lot more to be said about it. And I wanted to put it in the book, and he was really helpful. So I kind of got little bits of information, and then when I did it, I went and showed it to them and said, does that feel right? Is there anything that's going to get me on this? But mostly you go by watching. I was around during that period.
Do you have a good memory for that stuff then?
I have a good memory for things when I was younger, yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you?
No, not really, but what I think is amazing is how short memory is. I mean, it is amazing that the AIDS thing just ended, and even all of the work that it produced, all the plays and books, there aren't even any more of those. I mean, there was this huge, tragedy always produces an enormous amount of literature one way or another, and that's also escaped. And just seeing The Normal Heart last year, I don't know if anyone saw that, it brought back such a flood of memories of what it was like to be so confused and frightened by that epidemic and not knowing how to behave or who you were going to lose. And it's amazing to me because it changed the lives of so many people.
It really did, and I wanted to sort of document that in it, because I felt a real emotional connection, rather than just saying, okay, now the 80s. It wasn't like that, It wasn't like a greatest hits or worst hits of different eras at all.
Well, there's this quote, which I'm sorry to say you said, because it's probably going to throw you, but you said that you associate time periods with different sensations and emotional balances.
Oh, God.
And I have no idea what the hell that means. And I don't even know what the word balances mean. I had to look it up. But maybe you could speak about that.
Where did I say this? Pretentious monthly?
I don't know. But it means that there's something, you said it, so you must associate the times of your life with feelings.
Yes, that's what
you're saying.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay.
No, but I do mean that. And think about a moment when you're 15, because this book was about really sort of, it starts with about that feeling of being 15 and waking up to the world, opening the door or the window and the advent calendar that is going to be the rest of your life. It has songs attached to it. It has the smell of that summer. It has lots of Carole King music. It's got all kinds of stuff that I feel so vividly. When you came of age, I think remains vivid to you forever. I know that's true for you. And in your work, that is really, really true. And by the way, the line is in. I just want to say, we're talking about fiction, and it's all me tonight. And this is a marvelous book, and it's not really like anything else. And it's just this sort of, we're very, very different writers. But this book was, could you speak briefly about this, because it's a different book for you.
Yes, it was. Well, it came from a dream, but it's three women.
It came from a dream, right? I mean.
Well, that's very weird, but I have a really, really cooperative subconscious. It's about three women on the run and a lion that changes their lives, and it takes place in North Carolina, which is a state I'd never been in except in my dream. And I oddly, after I wrote this, I woke up, I dreamt these three women in a bar with this lion. One was 50, one was in a wedding dress in her 20s. I knew everything about these characters, and I knew they were running, each for different reasons. And it became almost it's not magical realism, this story. It's a real, my editor calls it Thelma and Louise crossed with Born Free. But it has such a personal, I think books are so personal because every character I can tell you what part of my psyche, well, of course it came from a dream, and then that lion who, I had the same thing you did, which was that I wrote this whole lion, and then I thought, God, suppose I'm wrong about him. And I gave it to a lion expert, and she, there was a moment where the woman in her 50s who says to herself, who I am is not a life sentence. That's one of the first things she says. wants to connect with this lion, and she sits in front of the cage and he sniffs her hair. She washes her hair in this really delicious smelling shampoo. And I thought, well, what is this lion expert going to say to me? And she said, oh, that's so perfect because lions in captivity are scent deprived. And we spray air freshener around them. So there's this, you know, to make them happier. So there's this thing in books where you know this has happened. You know it without knowing it. It's a very strange thing, and that's really sweet. But I want to talk about one more thing before we ask for questions. One of the things I really love is in this book is about Ash and Ethan get married, and Ethan was in love with Jules in the beginning, and Jules is best friends with both of them, and ends up knowing things about their marriage that each of them has kept from the other. And I think that thing about secrets in marriage is so interesting because people don't even talk about marriage. Once you get married, it's like this curtain drops.
Right.
Yeah, so I thought you would just talk about your feelings about that.
Yeah, I mean,
riveting.
That's so interesting, right? Because you become like this sort of, right? Remember in the Bridget Jones's Diary, the smug marrieds, right? Like this notion that you're this sort of skipping duo. There's something great in a marriage that you're a team, and that the world is hard. It's hard to go through life, and it's wonderful to go through life with a partner. But keeping secrets from a partner, which does become part of this book, it made me really anxious writing about that. It made me feel like disloyal in some way, that this was a character who we have to like, and we do like these characters, that they would do things, that they would keep profound things from each other, and then there are different points at which it's still not too late to confess, and those points keep getting gone past.
Yeah, that's so interesting, yeah.
I always feel that way, like when I'm watching a movie where somebody has accidentally become a killer, you know, and then a policeman walks by, and I believe in confessing to everything. I've played all kinds of like games, like this game Mafia, where you are like a policeman or like a villager, and like people always thought that I was like one of the mafia. Like I would always get knocked out of this game in 2 seconds because my face would get really red and hot. I wasn't guilty of anything, but I felt it as a child. I had a lot of dreams as a child, actually, in which I had committed some unknown crime, and my parents said to me, the police will be here any minute, and they gave me a little hobo stick, you know, like a cartoon, and they sent me off with a hobo stick with like sandwiches, like in a kerchief, and I'm like crying and going out into the world like a cartoon crow carrying a stick. But I think, so for me, writing that section where a husband and wife would in fact keep important secrets from each other was really hard.
Well, it's interesting, especially to me, because having had a really bad marriage followed by a really good marriage, I mean, my entire first marriage was one big secret, because the secret was, of course, that I wasn't happy.
Right.
And I was pretending to be happy every day, which is a huge secret to carry around with you. But in this case, it's a real working marriage. It's just over time, there are ways they can't show up for each other, and they're both. And the betrayals are very big in an interesting way. And I was so interested because I think marriage is such a hidden
The
thing.
closest I ever got to that in my life, like I have these 2 sons, as I said. For a while I was sort of I have great women friends, and for a while after my second son was born, I started talking just sort of promiscuously about, oh, I'd like to adopt a girl, and blah, 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 you know, but yeah, you know, it would be really fun. And somebody ran into my husband at a party and said, I hear you're thinking of adopting a girl.
Oh, that's so fabulous. Isn't there a Catherine Hepburn Spencer Tracy movie where he just brings a baby home and it's like, you know, 50s or 40s or whatever. Anyway,
What, about a lion? Oh, bringing up baby?
yeah, is that what? No, that's a lion, but there's one in which I think he actually made, I think it's in Woman of the Year. Yeah, that's the one where he just brings up a child. That's normal.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been an honor and a privilege. And are there any questions for Meg?
Or for Delia.
Yes, of course. Yes?
Actually, a question for both of you. You said earlier that you write to page 80 and then reevaluate. I'm also wondering about your reading. Do you read to a particular page and then say, you know, I'm giving up on this book? Or like I'll go to a bookstore and open to page 69. And I read page 69 and I'll decide on the book.
Oh, really? You have it cut off.
Well, not two books. It's a bookstore. And so I'm just wondering about how you read. Are you the type that sticks all the way through a book whether you hate it or not?
69 sounds really generous to me.
Yeah. No, I don't stick with anything that I'm not enjoying. I don't stick with anything.
No, I think reading is, look, a book is a deep pleasure. A book is, you know, a book is something where you are being asked to go into the interior life of another person. And that's something that you don't have to want to do, but it's amazing that we do. You know, they showed footage of amoebas to children and asked them to describe what they saw. And children, preschoolers said, that one's the funny one, that's the mother. They made narrative out of one-cell organisms. We have a desire for narrative, but we know when that narrative feels false. We can tell it right away. I think that you could stop at page 2 and you probably, right, it would be the same, you know. Yeah, I might stay a little longer than page 2, but I do start to say, why are you telling me this? And I want to know.
Yeah, and no, I feel exactly the same way. And I leave movies and I leave theater, and I just feel like it's not speaking.
It's liberating to leave something.
Yeah, and I think for an author, the most honored you feel is that someone is sitting on their couch reading your book. It's why it's purer and more special than anything in the world, and that's great. Yes?
Don't you feel if you left the book on page 2 or 4 or 6 or whatever, that sometime later you found out that you missed a great book if you had only stuck with it?
Then I would go back.
Yeah, I mean, 2 and 4 is early for me. I don't think I would necessarily give up, although you can certainly tell from the first line of a book whether the person's a writer, for instance. I think that that's true, or if they're pulling you into the story. But I remember, I mean, I actually think Bel Canto, which is one of my favorite books in the world, took a long time for me to get into, but you know what, I knew that it was worth it. I mean, so I think something, you just have to, you know what, it's life. You have to trust your gut.
Yeah, I think 2 is too early. I will go more than that, but you kind of know after a while. You want to give, I want to give writers the benefit of the doubt. I want to find a genius book. I crave it. I love it. It makes me excited for my own work. It just makes everything better. But
yes.
So what was the last genius book you both read?
Oh, for me, it was the Patrick Melrose novels by Edward St. Aubyn, which I just thought was extraordinary. It's 4 novels. If some of you have read them? The Patrick Melrose novels by Edward St. Aubyn, which were published in 1 volume. I love them.
Are they contemporary?
They're contemporary. He's a British writer. They are extraordinary, and I really, really recommend them. If you look up the Patrick Melrose novels, you'll find them as 1 book. Edward St. Aubyn, A-U-B-Y-N. They're thrilling. How about you?
Well, in addition to your book, I would say the Kate Atkinson book, Life After Life, which I absolutely loved. And I'm reading a book called Brooklyn by Colm Toybeen. Is that how you pronounce his name? And I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book.
So, but I frequently, Life After Life, but sometimes I can't read when I write. All I think about is what I can't do when I'm trying to think about what I can do. So
I'll read a burst, and it's like taking a vitamin drink, you know? A burst of something good.
Yeah, that's nice.
Well, I
yes?
Like the concept of envy, I mean, a big topic, you know, amongst women and men. And, you know, when you're envying for someone else, whether it's the letter that you're reading or somebody else's book, you know, I question, what do you do with your sense of self? Because you have a big self and a lot of accomplishments. You know, it's so unfair and so cruel to do to yourself when you think about it. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I actually have something to say about that. My husband always says that no one can do what you can do.
That's true.
And if you really, the thing, certainly as a writer, I have to go back to all the time, but because you always want to be writing what's true to you and not outside. You always want to be looking inside for what's personally true and not outside for what's popular. I mean, that grounds you, but it's also true in life. No one really can do what you can do, whatever it is. Your life is your fingerprint, and nobody else has your fingerprint. And so you have to constantly understand that who are you, and you understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Well, so I guess writing is similar to being a performer, whether a singer or an actor, because you have to do your best, but then you're enough. You have to feel secure within what you're doing.
Yes, I don't know, I mean,
I think it's so different writing than acting.
well, you know a
but
lot of performers because you've worked, because
I think of actors as a tribe of people. I think what they do is completely weird. It is extremely strange to stand up and do what they do in front of other people. I don't know if anyone here saw The Testament of Mary, but I simply was blown away by Fiona Shaw. There was a kind of, I'm thinking, this person is not a regular person, and I think that actors like to be together more than they like to be with anyone else because nobody else understands how weird they are about each other. So I don't think writers are, but I think if you spend your life in creative work, which is a privilege and a joy, that you are always exploring. You have to be not afraid of feelings and emotions and what ifs and anger and, right?
You have to be unafraid in all of the arts, I think. That's really true. And kind of in anything to do well, it's probably true. I think you could expand it outside that. I think to live fully, I get afraid a lot, but you have to fight that impulse.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
maybe one more question, or?
Wait, well,
Well, I had one.
yeah.
That was a
Go
question
ahead.
for Meg. I read your book this week and it really was genius. It took my breath away in parts.
Yeah.
So I hope you write another one soon.
I'm writing one even as we speak.
So the relationship that Ethan had with his son was really interesting to me, and as a parent it kind of almost pained me because it just felt like you couldn't accept him. So why did you choose to write that relationship like that?
Ethan has a son who's on the autism spectrum disorder, and he has, autism spectrum, and he has a hard time with that. I just feel that in keeping with the themes of success and what we want in ourselves, there is, of course, the related idea of what we want from our children and how we imagine our children. There's a running thing in the book about the drama of the gifted child by Alice Miller, how narcissistic parents form and deform the lives of their talented children. Is it okay to not be talented? Is it okay to not be a kid who you can show off to your friends in those obvious ways? I wanted to explore all of that, and also I wanted to give him a kind of human failing, because I think when I first wrote him, he was sort of, I loved him, as I said, and I just sort of, he was practically like inventing the cure for AIDS. I mean, it was like I had to kind of pull back. And this worked out well to sort of really sort of test him in a certain way and have him come up short in a very personal, for him, painful way. So that was my thinking.
Well, thank you for coming.